Gore Vidal, is there anything wrong with the United States?
Well, I assume that we do not have 2 hours at our leisure to discuss this, but I should say offhand, to sum up, I would say that the United States, which was the first country to go into the industrial age and into the space age, I'd say the main thing was wrong was a lack of any purpose in the society. That in a sense we have done what we set out to do, in the sense of affluence, and now we don't know what to do with it, having accomplished it. I think you see the same thing perhaps in Holland and perhaps in Scandinavia, that when you've got a certain material level of success, then what do you do? And I should say that perhaps boredom was the great danger in our American century.
Does that reflect so heavily on political life in the United States?
Well, inevitably, our society, being curiously democratic, means that there's enormous tyranny of the mass, which means that people try to avoid real issues in a campaign. We have them, but that our political life is mostly images. How this man smiles, and does that man have a nice wife, and does he seem to be a good father? I'm afraid that our political life tends to become very personal, and I find that dangerous.
Now, you have done a beautiful story on the election in conventions, in party conventions, of the candidates for the United States presidency. Now, in the beginning of your picture, you show the portraits of all American presidents. Do you think all or most of them were involved in things like the ones you show?
Well, being a drama, I must compress into 2 hours a great deal more than would actually happen in the space of a political convention of a single party. But politics has been much the same for thousands of years, and I would think that the making of any president, I think George Washington would understand my film quite as easily as the late President Kennedy, who very much liked it when it was a play on Broadway.
Are you bitter about this situation?
What situation?
Well, the situation of, for instance, the one you show.
Oh, no, I take it I'm realistic. I wouldn't say that I was very optimistic about our system, but because I am a writer, I want things to be better than they are, which is why I'm a critic and a satirist, and so I keep probing to make people better than they are. And one of the sad things that in Europe I think the film will have a certain difficulty in that there's the wit of it is very American, and I think that goes. So people who see it will simply see a strong, violent contest between two strong-willed men for power, which is perfectly understandable in any country, whether it is going to be De Fer and De Gaulle or Wilson and Hume in England. It's all the same, and I think that is recognizable. But when you say bitterness, I could see how somebody would think that my approach was much darker than it is.
Well, I just asked the question because you have been a disappointed candidate once.
Well, you don't know how disappointed I was. I was a candidate for the Congress, and I am a liberal Democrat running in a very conservative Republican district. And it's the same district that Franklin Roosevelt came from. And Franklin Roosevelt never carried it in his lifetime. And I didn't carry it either.
It's good for you.
Well, it's my only resemblance to Franklin Roosevelt, as we were both defeated in the same place.
Now, another question. I think that many of the politicians you depicted in your film, or sayings of which you quoted, are still living. Did they recognize themselves in the picture?
Well, there's a certain degree of recognition. It's not a pièce à clé. I'm not really doing a sort of a scandalous look at the private lives of politicians. The private lives are all invented. I have used characteristics of actual politicians, and they're sometimes, in a sense, they're politics. Many people think that the old president in the movie is Harry Truman. And I think the actor who plays him, Lee Tracy, played it on Broadway as well as in the film, and Lee Tracy somewhat resembles President Truman physically. So President Truman, when he came backstage in New York to meet Lee Tracy, the actor was terrified. Here was the president, you see. And the president looked at him a long time and he said, "I have known so many politicians like you, but he's very amiable."
Now, President Kennedy did see the picture. What did he think about it?
Well, alas, he did not see the picture because it was just finished.
The play, I mean, of course.
But he saw the play, and as a matter of fact, I wrote the play in 1959, and I gave it to President Kennedy. He was then Senator Kennedy, and I gave it to him to read. And it was much his favorite political play. He was always fascinated by how well it was doing and wanted to know, how many people were going to see it. And he gave me 2 or 3 lines of dialogue, which I used in the play. So he continually referred to himself as my co-author.
Now, he afterwards has been running for United States presidency. Did he encounter things like that in his campaign?
Yes, he did. He had many things. We won't go into personal things, but he had one terrible thing to carry, which was the fact that he was a Roman Catholic. And we have never had a Catholic president, and there's enormous feeling in parts of the country against this. So there was a whispering campaign against him that he was really a tool of the Pope. And on top of that, they said that his father, who had been ambassador in England during the war, was anti-Semitic, so there was a great deal of that going on. I was a delegate to the convention in Los Angeles, which nominated Kennedy. And as a matter of fact, in the film, we use a great many of the actual shots of the 1960 convention. But every night, under the door, they would put sheets of paper under the delegate's door with the latest bit of scandal about the Kennedys. So there's nothing that I can invent which is equal to life.